you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Last night, BBC Scotland broadcast its latest Disclosure Scotland programme, The Great Ferries Scandal. We learned some very worrying things about the way in which ferries 801 and 802 were bought. CMAL broke its own tender rules, which said there had to be a refund guarantee from bidders. There wasn't. Ferguson's received a 424-page report to help their bid. A key section of their bid appeared to have been cut and pasted from this. Ferguson was allowed to change its design, change its price after the deadline, and receive a confidential in-person meeting. And nobody else got that treatment. And all the while, CalMac thought a rival bid was better. In short, it appears Ferguson became an inside track shoe-in for the job, unbeknown to any other bidder. Ferguson's received special treatment from this government, who were desperate to award the contract to this yard, and we know how that ended up. Yesterday, John Swinney told us that the vital documents can't be found, and he said it will be left to the Auditor General to look into it. Now, the Auditor General does a great job, but the Scottish Government should not be hiding behind him on this, and in any case, they routinely ignore anything he says. They need to come clean, and they can't use these revelations. They can't use these revelations to stall and deflect. The buck stops with ministers, and there are several of them. If CMAL did favours for Ferguson's, it was because they were told to. This goes all the way to the top. You could call what we saw last night insider dealing, and it could leave the door open to costly legal action and add to the already astronomical cost of 2 ferries. Make no mistake, the SNP's handling of this is a scandal. But while the First Minister was on her tour of the Fringe this summer, we learned that she doesn't see it that way. Here's how it went with the respected broadcaster Iain Dale. Iain Dale, you've been in power, the party's been in power since 2007. That's ample time for that to have been sorted out. I mean, there's clearly a scandal over how the procurement was managed. Do you take responsibility for that? Nicola Sturgeon, I take responsibility for everything that happens in government, whether I like it or not. The buck stops with me. On everything. I don't shy away from that. I take issue with your language there, but there's no point getting into that. Iain Dale, what's your issue? Nicola Sturgeon, well, scandal. I don't think it's a scandal. I think there's been a situation with these 2 ferries that I don't think is acceptable, and we're learning lessons from that and focusing on putting that right. So she doesn't think it's a scandal, it's a situation. Maybe that Disclosure Scotland programme should have been called The Great Ferries Situation. Well, it's a scandalous situation, and that means we need a public inquiry and a police investigation to get to the bottom of it. Presiding Officer, if people in this government knew how to behave properly, heads would roll. Derek Mackay has gone, but so far nobody has taken the rap. They never do. But remember what the First Minister said, the buck stops with me. So let's see if that's true. Derek Mackay says awarding preferred bidder status was nothing to do with him because he was on holiday. He says his then boss, Keith Brown, was responsible. We know that CMAL eventually wanted to re-tender because of concerns about the lack of a builder's refund guarantee from Ferguson's. We also know they didn't want the preferred bidder status of Ferguson's to be announced in public, but why get in the way of a good photo op, because announced it was by the First Minister, who else, on August the 31st, 2015. Mr Mackay did award the final contract and accepts his share of the blame. He announced it in another photo op at the SNP conference on October the 16th, 2015. Of course, none of this was political, perish the thought. And John Swinney's mitts are all over this too. He signed off on the payment, despite knowing there were concerns. Meanwhile, the Glen Sannox, the fake Windows ferry launched in another photo op by Nicola Sturgeon in 2017 is still not complete. The 802 is even further behind. And a letter from David Tideman today suggests there may be even further delays. So many photos, so little to show for them. If you want to see more buck passing, then just listen to what ministers are saying about Ardrossan Harbour. That's where the Arran ferry goes to. But the new Arran ferry, when it's eventually finished, won't fit. So work will have to be done to the harbour if it's to dock there. Its private owners are now getting the blame for the fact there's no agreement yet on who will pay for that. It's quite extraordinary. It's always somebody else's fault. Derek Mackay has at least answered some questions, but he's no longer here. John Swinney, Keith Brown and Nicola Sturgeon, who says the buck stops with her, are, and it's they who should now walk the plank. We must also think ahead and decide how we can best run the ferries. I first asked for sight of the Project Neptune report in February, but Transport Scotland officials refused to release it until earlier this month, which I welcomed. I don't know why they dithered, because it doesn't tell us anything we didn't know already. We know the clunky setup with Transport Scotland, CMAL, CalMac and the Minister doesn't work. It should be streamlined. There's a mix of ferry services in Scotland: private, council-run, private, hired by the government, and just government. And it's that last bit that has the most problems. So why rule anything out when we look at how we run things in the future? Are we really saying we want the West Coast Service to remain as one big monopoly that would rule out council involvement and smaller local firms? We can't let dogma get in the way of public service. Now, I speak to islanders regularly and hear the same stories every time. And it was the same this week when I chatted to islanders from Arran and Mull. Missed appointments, people not able to get to work, kids not getting to school, people moving away because it's too stressful. They fear that another winter of chaos following a summer of chaos looms. Chaos upon chaos upon chaos. Shambles and scandal are now evidence that should merit a police investigation. We may go from the murky depths of the Clyde to a court of law. It's beyond shameful, and it's islanders who are suffering. It must end soon, and remember, the buck stops with the First Minister.